This is the Keys to the Kingdom podcast, where we explore how the psychedelic renaissance becomes accessible to everyone. I'm your host, Tammy Sanders, and I'm glad you're with us. Thanks so much for listening. This origin story episode is the tale of how I came to psychedelics and how Keys to the Kingdom came to be. It's a long road to psychedelic-assisted healing and growth in middle age. This expansive conversation travels that long road as it led to this podcast and my advocacy for broad and sustainable psychedelics access. Amelia Perkins, my friend of 20 plus years, helps me walk through my evolution and shares her perspective on what it's been like to experience me pre and post psychedelics. Amelia is a facilitator and coach who focuses on spirituality, sexuality, and creativity. She's been in the personal growth field for 15 years, and her practice includes women's workshops and guidance for individuals who want to deepen their relationships with their intuition and themselves. Amelia is one of the first people I reached out to after I had my early psychedelic experiences. I knew she'd be as excited and blown away by them as I was. Now, if only she had access. Amelia, thank you so much for being with me. We've just had 15 minutes of prep, and you've already, just warmed my heart and got us started in a good direction. Thank you so much for being with me today.
No, it's so sweet to be with you. Tammy Sanders, my old friend.
Indeed, old on several at several levels. And one of the things I really adore about you, Amelia, is you're the only person in my life who constantly calls me by my first and last name all the time. You always do that. It just makes me feel very well thought about that you use both my first and my last name.
Yeah, you are definitely Tammy Sanders to me. In fact, I mentioned you to a mutual friend recently, and I just said Tammy, and they said, "Who's that?" Only because you've never been just Tammy. So,
I appreciate that. So, as we've discussed, the theme of this conversation is how did I come to be talking about and caring about and advocating for psychedelics access? What is sort of the story behind that story? And I've want to tell this story with you for very particular reasons, because of who you are, because of who we are together, and because of the moment that you encountered me as I was setting out on this journey. I was trying to remember actually how long ago we met. I am not good with dates. Anything earlier than 2001 starts to get a little fuzzy for me in the date side. So do you recall actually sort of when we met?
I mean, I think I was 24 years old. Mm-hmm. I'm 46 now.
Yeah.
I think I was 24.
We've got some history.
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yes, exactly. So we met in Cambridge, and I think at the time you were at Harvard Divinity School, or you were associated with Harvard Divinity School. Can you just bring that back to me?
I went to Harvard Divinity School later, but when we met, I was working at the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions. I was working on a big museum project in Taiwan.
Got it.
With all these Buddhist nuns. And you were working in public radio, I think, right?
Yeah. And now, here I am, just podcasting away. I mean, I guess there was going to be some point where I was going to be broadcasting, and it's podcasting instead of radio. It's interesting. I think for me, Amelia, and I say this about you often, I've never met anyone like you. And that's not often something that you say about a person. Like often someone says, "Oh, I met this person and they reminded me of you," or, "You remind me of so-and-so." But you don't remind me of anyone, and no one has ever reminded me of you. Like there is something very kind of unique and specific about you. You are a sort of a very unique soul in this realm. I, I know we're supposed to be talking about my story, but like, how do you think, just if you were to think about a couple of three highlights of your life, how do you think you got to be you?
I wasn't expecting that. I also just had a flash of the fact that I really loved you from the moment that I met you way back then. And I also want to say that there was a gap, right? So what's fun for me about this conversation is I knew you very intensely in my 20s. There was a little bit of a gap,
Mhm.
and then there's a getting connected, which is
Mhm.
so sweet. But
Yeah.
in terms of who I am, I mean, I grew up with like a really wild mother who was an artist and also lived partly on the south side of Chicago. And it's a good question. I don't know. I don't even know how I became who I am. But I feel like it does, maybe it will unfold in this conversation, because I feel like it does play in a little bit to also my story of like my involvement in this world and my seeking, and also this like unbelievable yearning to connect with the divine that I feel like
Mhm.
I've always had.
Yeah.
That like sent me off to like a convent in Greece for a year at 30, you know. So, but my 24-year-old self, it's very sweet to think that like you recognized it back then.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned something here that I think is important, this yearning to connect with the divine. I think that that is something that certainly, I don't know that we had an articulation for that. You were in your early 20s or mid 20s. I was in my, I think, early 30s at the time. And I don't think we really had that kind of sophistication in terms of the articulation of that. But I think that that is what we both sort of saw in each other and connected about in each other, is that it, it couldn't have been the case that this is all there is in the world. Like, isn't there something grander or deeper to connect with? And I think you and I sort of bonded over that, even though we didn't call it that.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
Yeah.
And I think there was so much that I don't, it's funny, as I was preparing and thinking about this conversation, I was like, there's also so much I don't know about you. Like, I feel like we were together, like feeling each other's beings, but it wasn't like we were like, so tell me everything about your history. Tell me everything about your life.
Mhm.
We would just go dancing or sit and talk about other things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. We would talk about these sort of very deep things, but I only just recently remembered that you had a brother, for example. It's like, oh, that's right, she has a brother, because these kinds of details were not the sort of. It's interesting. We weren't necessarily talking about sort of typical human details. We were sort of always sort of talking about sort of grand things and the essence of being, and that kind of, those kinds of topics.
it's
Yeah,
true. It's
but
true.
forgetting like each other's birthdays. Like, I
Yeah,
just can't remember your birthday to save my life. But I'm very glad you were born. I tell you that.
I'm really glad you were born too. Oh,
All right. So, uh, can you maybe just then talk a little bit about the work that you do now? Because that work, I think, did sort of prime you for our reconnection. And I think also, and I may have this detail incorrect, but you live on the East Coast, and something had brought you to the West Coast right around the time that I was starting my journey with psychedelics. So can you tell a little bit about the work you do now, and then also what had brought you to the West Coast?
sure. So right now I do essentially coaching, and I do workshops for women around pleasure and intuition and creativity. And I also work with my partner on a lot of couples stuff. Like, so we have a beautiful couples workshop right now on essentially moving more towards pleasure. We have this idea, we both have studied a little bit of Tantra, and we have this idea that like you can dive into the pain of things, which also I have to say I've done a lot of and totally enjoyed on some level. I think it's rich work. Or you can like head towards pleasure and sometimes get to the same place faster.
Mm.
So, and I also work with individual clients around all that. So when I went to the West Coast, it was because we had just gotten engaged, and we'd gone to the West Coast to see my partner Eric's mother and sister and have an engagement party.
That's
So in the
right.
midst of the sort of familyness, I zoomed off to see you.
Yeah, and I think I don't recall if we had, I'd found out about this via Facebook or something, but I remember like, you got to come see me. I have something I have to tell you. And I really specifically, like, I had to tell it to you, like maybe, sort of revisiting back to that connection with the divine, that connection with something deeper and infinite. I was like, I have to tell you this thing. Like, you have to come see me.
And it was a huge moment for me because I hadn't seen you in years, and it was so palpable that something had shifted with you. Like there was something so it was almost like a feeling of grace. And even the way you were thinking, I was trying to remember like what my impression was. I was just talking to my partner about it because he remembers me coming back from seeing you and saying, whatever Tammy Sanders is doing works. Like something profound has happened here. And there was almost a way that you could see your thoughts in this new way. Like it was very expansive and beautiful, but you were
Yeah.
also very grounded. And because I saw you in that moment where it was just opening, I don't know the full details. And I'm actually dying to know, like, because again, in that moment when we were together, we didn't talk details. So I want
No,
some details now. I want to know, like, how did that happen? How did that begin?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's okay, Lynn. We'll get into that. I actually have a quick question for you though. You
Yeah.
said that something profound had shifted, but you were also grounded. Do you know what the essence of that is? Like, what do you mean when you say that? How do you know someone is grounded? What does that mean? Because I
You know,
think you're saying something really important. Like, I wasn't off on some sort of hippy dippy trip. I think that's what you're saying. But how did you know I was grounded?
yeah. I mean, this is a big thing for me because I'm in a world where there is a lot of spiritual bypassing. So I feel like I do have, and my hope, my hope and craving for myself and for those I work with is a kind of embodied connection to the divine. So it's like you're in it. And so I feel like I have developed a kind of a little intuition for that. And you were clear. You were your thoughts were so clear. You were unbelievably articulate, and and you were there. Like I could feel the presence of your being. Like you were in your body in a very profound way. Oh, maybe even more than you had been before.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could feel your aliveness in your own body, in your presence, and your thoughts were just incredibly clear, expanded, but also um, there was a great calmness in you. And it's interesting when I talked to my partner Eric about it, who's a clinical psychologist and has been, following all the research around psychedelics and MDMA research. He said, well, according to the NEO, I don't know if you know about the NEO, but it's a personality test. And essentially, there is this whole thing about how people who take, I think it's particularly MDMA, it's different, but they have more openness
Mm-hmm.
and less neuroticism.
Mm-hmm.
And you've never been a neurotic person, in my opinion. Like you are a strong, like calm human in general. At least you appear that way. So, but you, like, it was all there. It was very palpable.
Interesting. That's really helpful to hear. I also remember you saying at the time, it's like you're you and you're still you, but you shifted. You just shifted to the left a little bit. And now there's this whole profoundly different parallel you. And that's certainly how I felt. So, um, this was 2018. No, I'm sorry, 2019. This was, I think, maybe March of 2019 that we reconnected. And the 3 or 4 months before that was when my psychedelics work started. And I came to that work because I was in a place where I just couldn't I couldn't figure out how to not want to break everything. I just wanted to break my life and break the world, and also just leave it all behind. And I didn't know why I still felt like this. You know, by this point, I am just about to turn 50. I am married to a wonderful, wonderful human being. I am living and working in Silicon Valley. I am working at the time for the largest by valuation tech company, and I'm pre-IPO with that company. It was a goal that I had, is that I wanted to work for a pre-IPO tech company, and I'm working for the largest pre-IPO tech company in the world. Externally, all is well. And internally, I am in rage. I am just consumed and so enraged. And I just didn't know why. Well, let me rephrase. I didn't know why I was still there, because I had done all this work, right? Like when you and I met, when I was in my early 30s, I learned that I had depression. And so I did a lot of work. I got a therapist. I started taking St. John's. I did not want to be on synthetic medications. So I started taking St. John's, working with a therapist and doing a lot of deep introspective work. I had worked through depression. It really wasn't a norm for me anymore. I had really come through having depression be a way of life for me. That was pretty profound, right? I
Yeah.
worked through addiction. Before I met you in my early 20s, I had come into 12-step program, and I had done 11 years of 12-step work. And I felt I had really, truly recovered myself. I had sort of gotten back some semblance of a self that I could start to work with. So I had like 20 years of work, and I'm in this place where I'm like, I can't stand humanity. I can't stand it. And I don't want to be a part of it. I want to be a dolphin or a tree. I don't want to be a human. I don't want any part of it.
Yeah, I mean, can I ask you a question quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the anger different than the depression? Or do you feel like the anger, like I'm just wondering if it was like a new manifestation or if the anger had always been there?
The anger had always been there, and the anger was there first.
Yeah.
I remember when I first came into 12-step, I came into 12-step because in my early 20s, I was in a relationship with someone who was very much in the throes of an addiction to crack cocaine. This person had been arrested multiple times, had been in jail multiple times, but was also the first person I ever met in California when I arrived when I was 21 years old, and had been very kind-hearted and open-hearted with me. And so we ended up dating, and this person's life was just spiraling out of control, and I was spiraling around with them. So finally, the person went into a 28-day treatment program, and I came in as part of family. And I remember sitting in my first sort of round the circle conversation, listening to people talk, and I don't remember the details of what anyone said. I don't know why, but I felt something ignite in me, and I just wanted to put my fist through glass. I had just all of this emotional intensity that was like a raging forest fire. I was so enraged. And I remember saying after it was over, the therapist who had led the group said, how are you feeling? And I was like, I just want to put my fist through glass. And she's like, you need to come back to Codependence Anonymous. Maybe do some work. And I was like, I will do anything to not feel this way, because this feels so dangerous.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think the
Yeah, tell me, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think to kind of finish off, like the depression was different in that when I felt depression, when I was in depression, I was immobile. It was
Mm.
as if someone had poured tar all over my body, and I couldn't get up anymore. I couldn't, like, just moving through the world just felt, it just felt impossible to move through it would take all the energy that I had. So it's interesting, this time that you met me in Boston, because I had stripped away addiction, so I wasn't getting away from myself anymore. That's when depression came to the fore. And this is what I was working through at the time we knew each other first.
Mm.
And my days in Boston would go like this. So I was teaching at the time. So my days would go like this. And I would teach like early afternoon and evening classes. So I would wake up in the morning and just lay there and think about, like, do I really want to do this? And I would finally sort of get myself up, and I would make myself go outside and sit in the sun and just try to get some sun on my face. And it was like taking a vitamin for real. Like it was just like this thing that could energize me enough, like fill my battery up enough. And then I would go into this classroom with these adults who were trying to learn English so they could get on with their lives. And I would pour all of the energy I could into these adults. And they would certainly give their energy back to me. And then I would drag myself home, maybe eat something and go to bed. And I did that a lot. And then every once in a while, I went out and did something social and met wonderful people like you. And I think, I just sort of got plugged into this really so smart, thoughtful community in Cambridge, which is not hard to do when you're living in between MIT and Harvard. It is not hard to get plugged into smart, thoughtful people. And I think that really sustained me for quite some time during that period. I was really fortunate to meet folks like yourself and all wonderful, wonderful people I met during that time.
Hmm. Thank you for that history. That's like, this is so, there's something very profound about this for me, because I'm just like, I'm noticing my deep yearning to know the details of your life in a way that we haven't necessarily gone before. So I'm really grateful for this. And so tell me, so now where were we when I moved us into that? We're now in this moment. You're feeling like all this, things are fine. Your life is good. You're married to someone you love. All is well.
Yeah, all is well.
And so how did you get from that moment to the next moment where you tried this thing?
Yeah, well, because it wasn't well, right? Like, life wasn't actually well. There was this, so I was working at a place that was known for its problematic culture. And I had taken the job that I had taken because I wanted to be part of the solution. The building was on fire, and I fancied myself something of a firefighter who was going to run in and help. Well, let's just say I underestimated how problematic the culture was. And I ran into a lot of issue just being me, being sort of a force of change, wanting to do things in a way that was going to upend a lot of the structure that existed. And I upset a lot of people. And they made that upset known and came after me in a way that, was them sort of acting in their best interest. Right. But it was causing a trauma response. And I didn't realize that my work environment was traumatizing me. I did not realize that. And now what I realize is I very much struggle when I see what I believe is incompetence in adults who have power, particularly power over other people's lives. So managers and leaders fall into that category. There's an expectation I have of what a manager or a leader is supposed to provide, or how a manager or leader is supposed to behave, or how a manager or leader is supposed to care for others. That is incredibly challenging for me when I see managers and leaders doing the opposite of that thing. It's not surprising that I got into professional development where my focus is supporting and developing managers and leaders. What I'm trying to do is to help adults with power be more competent with their power, because they have exponential effect on other people.
Yeah. Also, I will say one thing I've noticed about you is you also have an amazing bullshit detector, and I think you can really feel when there's any kind of injustice and like people are being done wrong or stomped on or whatever. And you also have a kind of bravery to like head in there and try to make an impact, make a change, make some good happen. And I also just feel for you because I sense in that situation that was not fun or easy. That sounds really, yeah.
Well, I also now realize that the reason I ran into that burning building of an employment situation was because trauma needs trauma. And, by the time I was 8 years old, my childhood was over. And it was because my childhood was shaped by adults who were roundly incompetent at being people who were responsible for the life of someone else. They were not competent at this at all. In fact, they were profoundly incompetent. And they had a lot of power. They had a lot of power. And that power was wielded on me and at me. And it was incredibly damaging. And I think that shaped this impetus that I had, and this sort of rage that I had about adults who don't use their power for good, right? Who use the power for themselves. And so, I see this what I think is this opportunity to, essentially help save the world, help right the wrong of adults who don't competently use their power. And I go rushing toward it. And it turns out it wasn't the best idea for me. It wasn't the best idea for me. But I will say, if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be where I was, because I got to a point where this was really a traumatizing situation for me. I didn't realize I was in trauma. I just knew that I couldn't take it anymore. And my wife and I, we don't go to a lot of movies because she just can't see a lot of movies. She's very, very sensitive. And so the explosions and whatnot they're just not her thing. But we went to go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, say again?
That makes me love her so much. That's really sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Her heart is kind and tender. But we went to go see the movie Leave No Trace, which came out in 2018. And this movie is about a man who, with his 15-year-old daughter, lives completely off the grid and illegally in US forest lands because he can't be in civil society anymore. He can't do it anymore. Mm. It's interesting because the movie never really gets into where he got his PTSD. It focused more on what he wanted to do or how he wanted to live because he had PTSD. So me and this character, we don't have anything in common. It's a, cisgender straight white man in his 30s with a kid. And I am a non-gender conforming gay Black woman almost in my 50s. This is not supposed to be my story. But at the end of the movie, the character does something. He makes this really heartbreaking choice. And when that happened, I was like, that's me. That's what I want to do. I want to do that. And I knew in that moment, now I know what's wrong with me. Now I know. I walked out of the theater. I looked at my wife. We were in the middle. She was in the middle of talking about something. And I just like interrupted her. And I said, I think I have PTSD. And she was like, that explains everything. And I immediately started using the resources that I had at this very big fancy tech company to get myself a free therapist. Ultimately, I also went on a 3-month medical leave. I took a 3-month mental health leave. And that's when I started doing psychedelics.
Wow. Wow. And how tell me a little bit about like the moment when you chose to do the psychedelics, or how that decision came about, or what you'd
Yeah.
learned or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So keep in mind, I said, when you and I met, I was in my 30s. I was just learning that I had depression. So I spent like the entirety of my 30s recalibrating myself so that I wasn't a person who lived with depression. And that was a hard and bumpy road. Like I had one of the worst intimate relationships that I'd ever had. And, keep in mind, I just told you I was with someone who was addicted to crack. And I still had one of the worst relationships I'd ever had in my 30s after I had gotten sober. And the reason it was one of the worst relationships for me is because I was just completely unmanaged and out of control in this relationship. I was emotionally unmanaged. And so I was swinging between, anger and fear and sadness. I mean, it was just all over the place. And again, trauma needs trauma. I had put myself in this sort of toxic, traumatic relationship in my 30s after I had done all of this sobriety work. And that was, because of depression, like sort of depression sort of really sort of guiding and steering my life. So I spent a decade learning how to not have that be the case. The previous decade before, even all in my 20s, I spent learning how to not act out of addiction, not be in addiction, not be suicidal. I mean, at 23, I was pretty much done being on the planet. And I was truly considering, how do I just get off the planet? I need to go now. So I was like thinking about very sort of clear-headed, in a very clear-headed way, thinking about, well, I could do this, or I could do it this way, or, I could do it like this. Like I was, just very much considering, like, how do I just leave? And this was right before I ended up going into 12-step. So I'd spent, a lot of years figuring out how to be on the planet, how to not be in toxic relationships when I was on the planet, how to not be immobilized with depression while I was on the planet. And then I discover that I have PTSD. No one had ever told me this. No therapist who had heard, like, therapists have heard the gory details of my life. And no one had ever mentioned this because we weren't talking about trauma the way we're talking about it now. We weren't talking about PTSD. But like, it's like common nomenclature now. Oh, like I hear people saying like, I went to the taco truck and it didn't have the burrito that I wanted and I had PTSD. Like it's just thrown around now. But it just wasn't even a thing when I was healing for most of my adult life. So now I realize I've got PTSD, and I, go to a therapist. She's a cognitive behavioral therapist. She's one of the best therapists I've ever had. She actually ended up becoming our marriage therapist. And I'll just say really quickly, that's very unusual that a personal therapist becomes a marriage therapist. And she, of course, she's, highly ethical and very well trained. And she was like, I'm not going to do that. But I was like, no. You don't understand. I'm not even the person, like, you're not the person you were treating, that I'm not that. So just pretend like I'm a brand new person, because that's where we are now. And once she started to see us, she was like, okay. So psychedelics shifted me enough that even a therapist who had diagnosed me with PTSD was like, yeah, you don't qualify for that anymore. I can do couples therapy with you now. So we'll get to the details of that in just a minute. But yeah, just kind of understanding that I had PTSD, and not just PTSD, I learned that I had compound complex PTSD, which is you can have PTSD because you've been exposed to multiple kinds of trauma, or you can have PTSD because you've been exposed to repeatedly to the same trauma. I had both of those. So she was like, yeah, you've got compounded complex PTSD. And I remember thinking, I am not sitting on another couch for 10 years working this through. I am not doing that. There has got to be something that can get me through this quickly. And I had what I would call exponential experiences. Like Burning Man was an exponential experience, like these experiences where, there's just sort of this rush of change or difference, this rush of new perspective, this rush of opening. I knew that was possible. I just didn't know like what to do. So I just went online, because now we have the internet, which, I didn't have when I started therapy when I was 23. But now we have the internet. So I just typed in PTSD experimental therapy, enter, and MAPS came up, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, for folks who are unfamiliar. And MAPS was doing these PTSD trials with MDMA. All these letters are new to me: MAPS, PTSD, MDMA. And I was like, MDMA, whatever that is, I need that. And I just went on a hunt. So I'll stop there in case you want to, like, you have any questions or thoughts or anything, because I could keep talking about this.
No, this is so good and so beautiful. And I just want to like hold that I think a key part of this story is that you did do years of work. I mean, you worked hard, and you were also so willing to like look at yourself and like engage yourself in the next layer and the next layer as it came along. So I just have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, I think, I think that I knew I had this inherent knowledge that things were supposed to be good, that I was supposed to be enjoy. The first word I ever remember reading, like, this is going to sound so hokey and like I made this up for like my Lifetime channel memoir, but I'm serious about this. The first word I remember learning to read on my own was the word hope. I remember as a kid figuring out hope on the page and learning to read that and thinking how amazing that was, that there was this word and you could read it. And it's something that and I knew what it meant. Like, to hope was to always think of the, like, I mean, I'm thinking about this like as a little kid, right? To hope was to always yearn for something good. Like, that's what it meant to hope. And that's the first word I remember learning to read on my own as a kid. The yearn for something good. And I think I had that. I had this yearning for goodness. But I just, like, there was all this stuff I had to clear to get to it. Like, it's just this, and there was just this constant clearing. And so when I got the PTSD, realizing that was sort of the fundamental crack in my foundation, that was always the slant in my life. So all of these situations I had found myself in, I actually realized, wow, I kind of showed up at those places with a mental health disability. Like, I showed up in these relationships with a mental health disability. The first time I saw the therapist who diagnosed me, the first time I saw she had written on a piece of paper that I had a mental health disability, I was like, what? And we had to process this. I was like, I don't think of myself as disabled. I mean, like, look at my life. Like, I'm not unable to do anything. And she said, well, maybe one of the ways you can think about this is being disabled is not the same as being unable, but it does mean that the obstacle course has had a lot more challenges in it for you than it might have had for someone else. And so it has taken a lot of effort for you to get through the obstacle course of your life.
I'm so glad that I mean, it's a weird thing to say, but I'm so glad you got this diagnosis, because you are someone who presents as incredibly capable, as very adult, like the one who can be the adult in the room when others are not the adult in the room. Like, you're a really high performer.
Mm.
And so I can see on some level how you like went through life without, like, nobody looked at you, like, even way back when, no one was like, that's a lady with some trauma. Like, nobody was saying that, that's a high performer, super capable, super adult, who's got shit together. And so I'm grateful to know that this sort of secret internal piece got revealed.
Yeah, it definitely was a revelation. And I would, say to all the sort of, super capable high performers out there, leading with our intellect, relying on the fact that we can figure it out. Maybe there's a moment where we stop and actually explore what's all that high performance about? What's that about?
I've been to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was relying on that high performance to fix the world, to fix me. And it didn't work for me. It didn't work for me.
Yeah. And I can see that fine line between high performance and hypervigilance, where it's like, when do you get to surrender? When do you get to surrender into the joy?
Yeah, I was talking to someone recently about psychedelics, and I said something about that, this sort of being able to release, and the person said, I'm just not ready to surrender. I'm not ready to do that. That just feels like a surrender to me, and I can't do it. And I just thought about that and said, well, if surrender is equated with defeat, then I can understand why you wouldn't do it. And I think that there is a degree to which so the intellect might feel defeated. The intellect can't figure it out on its own. Like, for me, I had to find and reconnect to my heart. And that was the only way to sort of come back into my soul, come back into the deepest parts of me. I couldn't do it alone with my intellect. It was not enough. I couldn't know enough. And that for me is why, like, talk therapy was really, really, really helpful. I cannot say this enough. Talk therapy, especially in the early parts of my PTSD diagnosis, talk therapy was like cognitive ICU for me, right? I got some tools so that I could, get up in the morning and function and leave my house and interact with other people. Sort of keep it together. I got some tools for thinking about what was happening inside of me. It was very, very, very helpful to have my intellect engaged around this, but it couldn't fix it. It wasn't enough. And that's why psychedelics were so important to me, because psychedelics were the tools of the heart, of the mind, of the spirit, of the soul. The psychedelics were the tool of my whole humanity. Whereas for me, talk therapy was a tool for just sort of a specific part of my humanity. And it wasn't enough by itself.
Yeah. I also just want to throw in a piece about surrender, because I think surrender is so huge. Like, that idea of, like, my sense of you when I first saw you was a sense of, there was nothing sort of weak about it. There was almost like a kind of victoriousness, but with like so much humility. And that idea that surrender is like just giving yourself over to something larger. Like, you felt like someone who was being held by the world, as opposed to someone who just like was a lone operator and needed to like make it happen. And that was a profound shift, and it was very palpable.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I certainly, before this, I had been very much a lone operator. And, now with psychedelics, that's just such a fallacy. It's such a fallacy that, that I, or honestly, any of us are lone operators. We can keep trying to do that, but it's just not true. I want to actually sit on surrender for a minute too. I think I can see how sort of all of the ways that I've worked to recover myself fit together. Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step, really, like, the first premise is you have to surrender. You have to give yourself over.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love how all the pieces of your journey also, like, the themes are all there. And I do want to know, so you looked up this experimental treatment, and what then? Like, what then? So you just knew in your bones that this was something that you wanted to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this is summer of 2018, and I am a hot mess. I now, like, the PTSD has been revealed. And so now I'm in full on just rage and agony at this point. I am incredibly emotional. I will weep at the drop of a hat. I am spilling out of myself. And my oldest friend, who I went to high school with, her birthday is a couple months before mine. So she's turning 50, and there's going to be this party for her. And I decided to go and surprise her. She hates surprises, by the way. I know that she hates surprises, but I also am so fragile. I can't tell anybody that I'm going to come, because I can't rely on the fact that I'm actually going to show up. The only person I can tell is her youngest son, who I'm very close to. He and I are cut from some kind of similar cloth. So he's the only one I tell that I'm coming. And so he meets me, we go out to lunch, and he asks me, "How are you doing?" And I burst into tears in this restaurant. And he's like 21, right? So he's like this 21-year-old dude, like, in a public place with, like, this old lady who's crying, right? And he's like, "I don't really know what to do right now." And I was like, I have PTSD and I don't know how to fix it. And, there are these experiments going on with drugs, but I don't know anything about them. And he was like, oh yeah, I know about that. And I was like, "You do?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, I know about that." And so he just starts telling me, like, everything I need to know, right? About, what is MDMA and what's it for and what does it do and, how does it help? And I'm like, okay, this is possible. This is possible. I mean, it's crazy. It was incredible. Yeah. So it was that kind of serendipity kept happening to me over and over and over again. My wife, who's generally a very private person, is working at the time at this small tech company in San Francisco. She has a couple of people at work that she's friendly with. One of them, she goes out for a lunch walk with. Apparently, she starts telling him about what's happening with me and that I have PTSD. And he says, "Oh, I actually am shifting from being an engineer to a psychologist, and I'm going to the California Institute for Integral Studies. And I know about psychedelics and psychotherapy. You should have Tammy, you two should come over for brunch, and I can talk to her about this." Like, it just, these serendipities just kept happening. They just kept happening. I go to brunch. He gives me a couple of names. One of those names ends up becoming my therapist and guide.
Wow. I love the serendipity. So,
and see, this is the part that's hard, I think, Amelia, for a lot of people. Like, relying on that kind of serendipity to save your life, I think could scare people, right? Like, no, like, I got to control it. I got to figure it out. Like, and I realize very early on, because, 12-step taught me this, and then like sort of my life experience taught me the rest. I don't need to figure it out. I just need to be ready. If I can be ready, if I can be willing, like, the way will come. I don't need to go make the way and find the way and go get it. Like, I just need to be willing. And when it comes, show up for it.
Yeah. And also, I think sometimes, see, you were kind of trained to respond to that moment on some level. Like you'd learn the lessons you needed to learn to be able to respond. But also, I also feel for people who are in that state and don't have the ability to respond to those little nudges, or the nudges aren't coming, you know?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think maybe the nudges are coming, but because they're nudges, it can be really easy to just overlook them. And I will give a great example of this. So I had a buddy of mine had come to visit me when I lived in Boston. He came for 4th of July. And I had decided that it was a brilliant idea for us to rent a kayak and kayak down the Charles River to see the fireworks over the river for the 4th of July. And this was a ridiculous idea because my buddy was not an outdoors person. I was not an outdoors person. Neither one of us had ever kayaked before. But we choose
like, this seems like a great idea. I'm getting it now. I'm getting it. Okay.
This was a horrible idea. We choose the busiest day of the year on the Charles River to get into a kayak and go 9 nautical miles down the river to see fireworks. We had been given some floaty bags for our valuables. I remember getting out of, and somehow we made it. Somehow we made it down the Charles River. We get out of the kayak. I'm on the dock and I'm leaning over the boat. And I have my house keys in my hand. And I heard a voice say to me, "You might want to put those in the floaty bag." And I said back to the voice, "I'll do it later." And 2 seconds later, I went to do something, opened my hand, and my house keys fell into the Charles River on the 4th of July when my roommate was out of town and everybody's on vacation. And I have a house guest.
Yeah. Listen to those nudges.
Listen to the
nudges.
Listen to the nudges. It is the small, still voice of wisdom inside of you.
No, absolutely. My brother just came to visit me from New York, and I had the nudge. I should pick him up in town. I was like, there's no reason to pick him up in town. And then he drove down a snowmobile road and got stuck 450 feet, and it took us 7 hours to get him out. I was like, listen to the nudges, for God's sakes.
Well, what's interesting too is like when we talk about being connected to the divine, that's what it is.
Yeah.
For me, the divine is not out there. The divine is in here. It is in here. This is where the divine is, and this is what I am now connected to. So, I went to go see the person who became my therapist and guide. I went to go see her for the first time, and I remember just sitting on her couch, like just fuming. Like, I can't even believe I have to do this. I can't believe after all this time and after all this work and after everything that I've done, like I have to do this. And how do I know this is even going to work? And also, you're telling me that like I'm going to be a more conscious, loving person? What kind of nonsense is that? I am already a minority of a minority of a minority. And it has been hellacious to be that much minority in the world. And now you want me to be a conscious, loving person, which will be the most minority you could possibly be? Why am I signing up for this? That voice, that is the voice of Amazonia, my 17-year-old. One of the things that I have learned doing psychedelics is there are all these aspects of me that have had very central roles in my health and safety. There is little Tammy. My little one, she's about, I think maybe like at 5 at this point. And she's the one who keeps me connected to play and to other people, to like loving other people. Whenever my wife and I, get into some tiff about something, which we don't do as much anymore because, 2 years and $10,000 of marriage therapy really helps sort that out. But before that, we would get into, we would have some friction. And little Tammy would be like, you better fix it because we love Aaron and we want to be with Aaron. So you have to fix it because I'm not leaving because I love Aaron.
Oh.
Right. So
yeah.
That's little Tammy. Amazonia, the teenager, 17 was about the time where I realized, at least in terms of getting myself into adulthood, I'm on my own. At 16, 17, I actually set some boundaries down with the adults in my life and said, you're not hurting me anymore. You don't have permission to hurt me anymore. You hurt me again, and I'm going to hurt you back. Like you don't take advantage of your power anymore.
Yeah.
Like she is the one who sort of stands and fiercely fights.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was in my early 20s, I get the name from someone I used to date who like called me that. God help anyone who was dating me in my early 20s. That's all I can say.
You are a bit of an Amazon anyway. Like you just have a very, you're tall, you're warrior.
She is like, that's, yeah, she is. She's the, that is so the essence of my energy is warrior energy. And that is, and I see, if you want to know like the essence of it, let me rephrase, because I can't speak to, life for every single person on the planet, but for people that I talk to, when they are struggling with their purpose or who they are, I ask them to remember who you were as a teenager. If you had any good moment as a teenager, remember that good moment. That is probably the essence of who you, it informs the essence of who you are. And for me, Amazonia is the essence of who I am. She's like, let's go get it. Let's go make it happen. Like that is the essence of me. Then there's an aspect of me I call monster. And that is actually, I think how a lot of people respond, people who are intimidated by the force of my nature, have responded to me as if I'm like some big, scary monster. And I think about it as like, sort of this giant Yeti who is trying to talk and can't be understood. There's a movie that the name of the movie is escaping me now, where it's a cartoon, it's a kid's cartoon, where there is this giant Yeti and the Yeti's trying to talk, and all the human hears is "Rawr!" And the Yeti's like having this whole conversation and the human just hears "Yeah." That's monster. Like I'm trying to communicate to you, but because my energy is so intense and so forceful, it's just scary to people. But it's so that
it doesn't feel monstrous to you. Like monster, no, just monster is the force.
Yeah, monster is the force. Yeah. And it's interesting because, monster, like the force is like, I'll give an example of when the force has definitely helped me. And not like the Star Wars force, like the sort of the like hurricane force. I was in my early 20s and I was walking, I was out for lunch. I was taking a break from work, and I was out for lunch, and I'd gone to like a little mom and pop store. And as I was walking up to the store, this kid ran out of the store. And then the store owner like ran out after the kid. And the store owner was like this little old lady, like screaming at the top of her lungs. And the kid just kept running. And I just said, like, I just boom shouted to the kid, stop right there. Stop right there. And the kid stopped
Yeah.
and turned around. And I was
Yeah.
like, come back here. And the kid was like, you know, people used to tell me that I should be a cop because I had, when I was young, because I had that kind of boom, forceful energy. But I realized it was a very, very bad idea for me to have a gun.
Yeah.
And so I did not, thank God I did not become a police officer because I was so unmanaged. There was no scenario where it was a good idea for me to have that kind of power.
Yeah. No, I recognize monster a little bit, only in the tiniest little bit where I just am remembering that occasionally in my early 20s, I would be a little scared of you, but I wouldn't know why. But it was, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why.
You also have a great force of authority. I wonder if it is related to your authority because, you just, you've got it when you need it.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone said to me once, you act like you preaching the gospel. And I was like, well, you better pass the collection plate.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me just ask you quickly, did you learn about these parts of yourself like through the MDMA experience, or did you know about these parts before? Like
No,
you need to be, you're clearly in relationship with your various parts now.
Yeah. I think, I had some concept of these parts. Like, when I was coming up in therapy, people talked about your inner child. And I remember when I first started doing 12-step work, I would say, my inner child is having a temper tantrum and she needs to pull it together. Because I wasn't very compassionate. Compassion was not, I learned very early on that compassion could get you killed. Compassion could get you killed. This is the only story that I'll tell. I'm very reluctant to get into the details of the sources of my trauma because I am telling other people's stories when I do that. And if I'm going to do that, I need to tell the whole story, right? Because people don't traumatize other people just because they can't think of anything better to do that day, right? I believe that people traumatize other people out of trauma. And if I'm not going to tell the story of someone else's trauma to then provide context for my own, I think I do a disservice to the story. So I don't go into a lot of the details about from whence my trauma came. But this is one story I will tell about the danger of compassion, and sort of, I think why that was the case. I have a family that's rooted in the American South, in the hotbed of racism and white supremacy. There are folks who will say that white supremacy isn't really a thing. Just try being a Black person in the South, and then I think you might have a different perspective. I think you can try being a Black person pretty much anywhere in America, but definitely try being a Black person in the South. I have a lot of Black people in my family who've told me some just horrific stories about daily life. Like my grandmother who used to have to walk to school while the white kids on the school bus would go by them and throw rocks at them every single day just to go to school. Like, just imagine if your kids to get to school every day had to walk and endure a barrage of rocks being thrown at them. That kind of stuff. And other kinds of stuff, like lynchings and burnings and that kind of thing. And then there's like the minor stuff, like you can't get a job and you can't buy a house. Like there's all kinds of just systemic trauma that my family comes from.
Yeah.
So it is not surprising that I was taught survival. And to survive, you must be strong, you must be fierce, and you must either command or obey. You either command or obey. The woman who raised me, she taught me that I never had to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, or no, sir to anyone that I didn't think deserved that kind of respect. So it's very hard for me to respect people just because they think they're in some position of authority. But there's one exception she made to that rule, and that was her. Irrespective of whether I respected her, I had to obey. And there was one time where I was 7 years old. I was in first grade, and I had learned that you could get sick from smoking cigarettes, that they could make you really sick and you could die. And I just thought it was very important that everyone know this. You know, everyone needed to know this, because clearly, like, the only reason people are smoking cigarettes is because they don't know, like, they don't know that they could die. So I was like, I became on a mission to tell everyone. So I take my little 7-year-old self home, and my mother is smoking in the kitchen while she's making dinner. She's stirring green beans with a metal spoon. And I walk into the kitchen and I say, you know, Mama, you got to stop smoking, because smoking can make you really sick and you could die. So you have to stop smoking. Smoking is bad. My mother looked at me, took the spoon out of the beans and slapped me right across the face with it and said, girl, you don't tell me what to do. You don't tell adults what to do. And I was stunned, because I was like, I'm just trying to care about you.
You were protecting her life. Oh.
I learned very early, compassion is dangerous. Compassion is very dangerous. I didn't know that that's what I had learned. But all of the women who I saw in my childhood who were compassionate, they suffered. They suffered so much. They suffered at the hands of the men they were married to. They suffered in the world that they were in. They suffered. And I just remember seeing these women and thinking, I'm not going to do that. And the woman who raised me was a fighter. You know, she was a fighter. If you hit her, she'd hit you back 10 times harder. So, you know, that's what I learned. And so that's what I bring into my adulthood with me. So I get to this PTSD diagnosis, and I realize this warrior who's been enraged, like, she needs to heal. I can't go on like this. So my first 3 journeys were MDMA journeys. And they really helped me transform, first, the rage. I learned that rage was a birthright given to me by my mother's 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 mother, that all these women had figured out how to survive in this world by fighting their way through it. Yeah. And they had harnessed rage to survive. You know, I never understood anxiety. Like, I never understood, like, why are people afraid of everything? Because I didn't have time to be afraid. So I didn't have anxiety. I had rage.
I remember you once telling me, because I made some statement about the anxiety of COVID, and you were like, listen, for African Americans, there's no time for anxiety, you know?
Yeah. Now, it's not to say that Black people don't have anxiety, because, you know, I mean, lots of folks are coming forward with anxiety now and sort of talking about anxiety. But I do remember, just in my, you know, sort of in my existence, like, you just didn't have time to be afraid. You need to, like, pick it up and get on with it. But, you know, I think that's where I got depression, because if you're like dragging around this rage, it just got really heavy.
Right.
So in MDMA, I, you know, worked through rage in my first journey. In my second journey, I worked through safety and sort of the notions of being and feeling safe, because I realized the other thing about anxiety is this, you know, sort of this need to control so you can be safe. But I always knew that, like, there's no such thing as safety. It doesn't exist. Like, and I realized now that was my PTSD. Wow. Because essentially trauma is, as I understand it now, trauma is the fundamental belief that you are not safe in the world and the world is not safe for you. And I had been operating on that belief since I was 8.
Wow. Wow.
So I didn't have an anxiety problem because I didn't want to control anything because everything was already out of control. I knew it wasn't going to be in control and I wasn't safe anyway. So, that's why Monster had to be around. Monster helped keep me safe. So I really had to work through that sort of, what does it mean to be safe? And one of the key phrases that comes to mind. So, one of the things you've done for me, by the way, is introduce me to the Tuesday meditation group that we both participate in. That's facilitated by the lovely and very, very helpful Joe Weston. And I have gleaned so much from participating in this group, which is both a teaching group and a meditation group. And one of the phrases I got from that group is, safety is not the absence of danger. Safety is the presence of connection. And that has been really, really important for me. What psychedelics have done certainly reconnected me to myself, connected me beyond myself, and allowed me to connect to others. Psychedelics have actually helped me develop true safety. Not this sort of very tenuous safety that I had that relied on me being forceful and strong on my own. I can still be those things, but I also can be those things in connection with other people.
Yeah. My sense is also like, it somehow has made you more resilient in an internal way. And I feel like resilience, like an internal resilience, is also connected to safety somehow. Like the ability to meet a moment, like whatever the moment brings. But like,
I love that. The ability to meet a moment. That's a fantastic definition for resilience. The ability to meet a moment. Yeah.
Let me ask you, when you had your first experience, and I know there's more and I want to hear about them, but in your first experience, there seems like there's this sort of ancestral piece that came in.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a cognitive understanding? Did you connect to that ancestral piece? Like, what was the experience like for you?
It was very physical, it was a physical experience and also a cognitive, intellectual experience, and then something totally beyond that that I am challenged to find words to describe. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah.
I had this intense visualization of this object, like a flume that connected to the core of the earth and drew fire from the core of the earth. And the coloring of this flume was the color of my mother's skin.
Wow.
And it could bear the heat from the fire from the core of the earth. And I couldn't see the wholeness of this. I could only see at the top the flame that came out. But with MDMA and my MDMA journey, I could see the origin of this object, how much heat it had to bear. I could see the whole of it. And so I understood where the flame came from. I understood on a very visceral way and in a very deep level what it took to bear being in the world. And then I could think about, what are the gifts from this flame? Diamonds are forged from pressure, from intense pressure and this intensity. What are the gifts from the intensity of this rage and the intensity of what had been born? And out of that came discipline. I have a very natural discipline that is forged from this fire, right? I have resilience that is forged from this fire. I have the ability to persevere that is forged from this fire. And I do have sort of a strength of being able to bear things that's forged from this fire. So there, you're right. There's definitely some ancestral gifts that I was able to come away with. And that was because of the depth I was able to get to with MDMA, both in my body and then sort of deeper than that, like beyond my body. I was able to get beyond what I was holding in my body and get to deeper messaging. And it's the same with safety. Safety was a really very, I had a very truly unsafe childhood from every angle. My childhood was very unsafe. And so learning how I could reconfigure safety, I was able to do that by embodying this experience in the MDMA journey. Love, I was able to reconfigure what love meant for me and could mean for me. I came away with an understanding of love as unconditional care, the ability to care unconditionally. And I also came away with this notion that love is an equation written into infinity. And there's only a part of it that I can take away in this experience of being human, and that is unconditional care.
Ah, I love that. I love that. Tammy, did you go in to your second experience determined to work on safety?
Mm-hmm.
Or, okay, so it was your intention.
Yeah.
And that's what unfolded.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, I know that people will come and have come and will continue to come to psychedelics through all kinds of portals. The portal of therapy and mental health, the portal of the spirit and spiritual development. Some people will come through the portal of joy and recreation. There's all kinds of ways to come to psychedelics. I know that there are some folks saying, psychedelics are really powerful and you should only do them and then bracket, like whatever the bracket experience they want to have. I want to take the brackets off the experience. I think that there are many ways to experience this, many ways to access what psychedelics have to offer. For me personally, given, I had a giant crack in my foundation as a human that I needed to repair. And then I needed to do some reconstruction. It was best for me to do that with the help of a therapist and a guide, because we would do a lot of work beforehand. I would come in, we would talk out and process where I was and what I wanted to get to and what my barriers were and, what my challenges were. And that was a setup for us then to go into the journey. And then we would process what came out of the journey and how do I integrate that back into my life.
Nice. And where did you go from there? Like, where are you in this journey now?
Yeah. So MDMA was very foundational for me. So I did 3 MDMA journeys. And then ultimately I realized if safety is the presence of connection, I need to deepen my connection. How do I do that? And my guide was like, it's time for psilocybin. So my first psilocybin journey was very much for Amazonia. She was not convinced about all this. All the other aspects were on board. And by the way, there is also adult Tammy.
Yeah.
She's the one who presents out into the world, right? So, everyone else was on board. But Amazonia was like, nah, I'm not sure I want to connect with the humans. I still think I want to go. So we start my psilocybin, we do my first psilocybin journey. At the start of that journey, I remember I could feel like the spirit just stomping around in me. Like, I want to go. Like MDMA tells me that there's deeper love out there I want to go where the deeper love is, because the deeper love isn't here. The humans have not figured it out. All they want to do is terrorize each other. I want to go where the deeper love is. I want out. I want out. I want out. I remember that, like, feeling my spirit. I could actually physically feel it, Amelia, like pushing against my chest.
Wow.
And I think of my spirit as sort of my animating entity, like the entity that brings me to life. And that spirit is embodied by my 17-year-old warrior princess, Amazonia. So she is saying, I want to go where the love is. It's not here. I want out. I want to go. And my guide, she's the best, man. She's sitting very quietly and she says, you can go. Where are you going to go? If you leave, where are you going? You can go if you want, but where are you going? You don't know where you're going, but you can go if you want, or you can stay here and we can work through this together. So in that psilocybin journey, what I got to was I was not abandoned here by love, by the great source. I was brought here purposely and purposefully. There is this notion of not only doing this work for future generations, but also doing this work to heal the past and to heal the ancestors as well. So I am here in this moment in time for all of the people before me who couldn't do this work. And I focus a lot on, you know, the aspect of my family that is, you know, my Black family in the South. We haven't even talked about the aspect of my identity that are the white Germans from Germany.
Right.
Right. We haven't even talked about that.
Well, some trauma there, I think, maybe too. You know, that's crazy. Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting is I realized I am of the oppressors and of the oppressed.
Wow.
I am of both of those. So I do this work for all who could not do it before. And then I do this work for all that will be in the future. And that's what I really learned in my first psilocybin journey, is that I am a child of source living in the great now. I am both rooted and dynamic. How can I be flow? How can I not be calcified? How can I not be polarized? How can I hold duality? Because I am duality. How can I hold it and flow between it? How can I flow between oppressor and oppressed? How can I flow between judgment and curiosity? That conception developed for me on my first psilocybin journey. I don't think you get to that, at least for me, not in talk therapy.
Nope. That's so beautiful. Sorry, I just had to pause to weep a little bit. That was really big and beautiful. Oh my God. Oh my God. Also,
Yeah.
just hearing your whole story, but like these pieces of your story to come to that place is like, you know, it just gives me a sense of like words for this feeling I felt from you since we reconnected. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. So, you know, we focused a lot on the MDMA in this conversation because you and I reconnected at the moment I had just done my third MDMA journey. And the toxicity had really, like, I had flushed a lot of toxicity out of my life. I had reconfigured what trauma meant for me. I understood so much more about my lineage and the gifts and how grateful I was for the trauma, how grateful I was for all of it, you know, in the shaping of me. And you came back into my life right at that point. Right at that point. I hadn't done psilocybin journeys yet, right? before then. So I did my first psilocybin journey. And then I thought, I'm getting to the place now where I'm not necessarily like revealing and repairing so much anymore. Like now I want to start, like I want to reconstruct what it means to be me as a human. Like I want to do another one, but now I want to, like, let's see, like, I don't want to look back now. Like, let's see what happens if I do one of these journeys and I'm looking forward.
Wow.
So the next psilocybin journey I didn't necessarily have an intention beyond what do I need to care for next in my life? And it turned out it was my marriage. I was at this inflection point with my wife where we were actually deciding like whether we were going to stay married. And it wasn't because we didn't love each other, because we love each other very deeply. And it wasn't because we didn't like each other, because she's like the best. So that's all I'm just going to say, because she's the best. It was because we were having very different conceptions of what it meant to be together. And we couldn't find alignment. We couldn't find how to put our ideas about what it meant to be together. So I did this second psilocybin journey, and it changed my ability to think about what it meant to be together. Like I had this notion of unity that was solely about oneness, merged circles, overlapping circles. And if we weren't overlapping circles, if we weren't merged oneness, we were missing something. And she had this notion of like separation, like she needed to be her own thing. And if she isn't her own thing, she can't be with me. And I do the psilocybin journey. And what I come back to is this notion of flow and this reconfiguring or reshaping of what it means to be united, what unity means. And I take all of that into our couples therapy. And our marriage therapist is inspired, like this very sort of visual depiction, and she sort of draws it out. And both my wife and I go, that's it. That's how we stay married. Right? Like, so I take this insight that I get from psilocybin and psilocybin journey. I take it to couples therapy. Our couples therapist transforms it, puts it back into our marriage, and we're able to sort of move on with ourselves. I mean, one thing that I've learned too is that those of us who do these journeys, we don't just do these journeys for ourselves. At least I don't. I do this journey for my wife, who has never done a psychedelic journey, and maybe she will, but maybe she never will, right? I do it for my family. I do it for anyone who encounters me, right? I do this work not just for me, but for the world.
I'm also struck by the efficiency. I mean, there is something wildly efficient about this work. I mean, what? From the moment you were like maybe thinking of separating to the moment you came to the like merging between like independence and unity, like that was not much time.
No, it wasn't. It's also this ability to take these concepts that are overwhelming, are hard to, at least for me, to get just solely my mind around, taking these concepts and being able to work them through in a very deep way when I'm on a psychedelic journey. That brings me to LSD.
Oh, okay.
So when I did the psilocybin journey and sort of really got over this sort of hump, this sort of the last barrier, the last hump in our marriage, something occurred to me. I thought, what if I had never had trauma. Like, what if I just come into the world and been nurtured in love and connection and joy? Like, who would I be? What would my life be like? How would I think? And I, I started to, I asked this question, and then serendipitously, LSD started to come into the forefront of my consciousness. I started seeing articles and seeing videos about people microdosing on LSD. And I started hearing about people, really pondering LSD as, part of mental health. And I had always been afraid of LSD. Like, the cultural trope when I was growing up about LSD was it would make you crazy. One of my favorite movies is Flirting with Disaster. It's a Ben Stiller movie, and it's hilarious. He plays this guy who's adopted, and he goes off in search of his birth parents to kind of, sort of fill some gap that he has in his identity. And he meets all kinds of crazy characters along the way. And the last set of characters he meets are people who are actually his birth parents. And it turns out the reason they gave him up for adoption is because they had been chemists producing LSD, and they had been put in jail for this. And during this part of the movie, one of the characters in the movie, who's an FBI agent, is accidentally dosed with some LSD and goes off on like this crazy trip. And at some point, he's like running through the New Mexico desert in his underpants. This is what I thought LSD was about. You're going to end up running through the desert in your underpants, right? So I'm not doing that. That's not happening. But I started to have my conceptions of LSD challenged. And I have a book that I have been using to prep myself for all of my journeys. It's called Psychedelic Medicine. I'll put a link to it. It's been very, very helpful. And there are chapters on MDMA, ayahuasca, psilocybin, and LSD. And so finally, I read the LSD chapter, and it really, really helped me think differently about LSD. So I told my guide I would like to do this journey. I'd like to do an LSD journey. And I was very afraid. I think terrified is a good word, of doing an LSD journey. I was terrified that I was going to go out on LSD and never come back. But what it did do was it helped me understand sort of the source of humanity from my perspective is creativity, that it's about creativity. We are the result of a creative impulse, and we are the expression of creative impulse. We have creative impulse. We just can't stop creating. And that was really powerful for me to tap into my own creative impulse. The reason for that is I had this sense of the world is not designed for me. So I have to influence the design of the world. Until psychedelics, I had been doing that with force. It was the only tool I had. So I just used force all the time to try to influence the design of the world. If you've only got a hammer, everything's a nail. And I'm just hammering away at the world, just hammering. I do this LSD journey. I also am coming to the world and humanity now with more compassion, more care, more capacity in my heart and in my spirit and intellect. And then LSD gives me creativity and says, what if you could also come to this project of influencing the design of the world with creativity? I'm like, well, what would that look like?
God, I love that. I love that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I'll give just a brief example here of just, I can feel my brain being rewired now by psychedelics. I had started learning to play drums as part of this mental health break when I first started my journeying I started learning to play drums. And I decided, actually, I'm right-handed, but I decided I would learn to play drums with my left hand leading, because why not, right? Why not push the brain? So I'm learning to play drums left-handed. And it's hard because the left side of my body is like, we don't do stuff with dexterity, right? Like, why are you making us do this? And I do my first LSD journey, and 5 days later, I pick up my drumsticks, and it's like something had happened in my brain. Like my hands were like, we get it. We get what you're saying now. We're still not totally capable, but we get it. We totally get what you want us to do. Like, the rewiring is real, people. That's what I'm saying. The rewiring is real.
And the efficiency is real. I'm really obsessed with the efficiency right now. I'm like obsessed. I think efficiency is amazing.
Yeah. So, the next, I did one more LSD journey. The LSD journeys were hard for me because, for me, LSD is a portal into the infinite. My consciousness leaves this realm and is out in the realm of infinity, and then has to squeeze back in through the portal into humanity, right? It really is like squeezing back in through this keyhole, right? But I did one more LSD journey, and thank God I did, because that journey was about transition. I could feel a sense of sort of what it is like to transition out of humanity into infinity, and what it, sort of essentially it is to leave the I behind and to become part of the great we. And there are pros and cons to that. And so what I learned was sort of the joy of being human. Once I could come back, I really could feel the joy of being this individual human who has all this agency. And so for me, LSD, the second LSD journey, was about differentiating between power and agency, and why agency is actually, at least for me, something that is more holistic and creative in the world. Power is the sort of exertion that we have, but agency is both power and responsibility together, and mindfulness and thoughtfulness and consciousness. So when I am acting with agency, I exert my power, but I do so in a mindful, thoughtful, and conscious way. Whereas when I act out my power, I exert my force on the world. Bad things might happen, good things might happen, I don't know, right? It's just all about me. So that was my second LSD journey, and I'm really grateful that I took it, because it turns out my beloved stepmama, I call her my third mother, I ended up having to help her transition out of this life. I was not expecting to do that, but she had been unwell, but we thought she would recover. She did not. I went to go visit my parents, thought I was going to help them get some home health care, get some things together. It turns out, I went to see them, and in 7 days she was gone. And I think she was waiting for me to get there. She had asked me to come twice. I hadn't, because we were sheltering in place. I thought maybe she was just, kind of not understanding COVID, because a lot of the little old people didn't when it first started. But I helped her transition, and I was able to do that with this sort of steadiness and love and care, because I knew where she was going. She was going back to the great we, and she was a woman of faith, and she very much believed in love and the divine in her way. So we made that journey together. We made that transition together. I sort of helped her do that transition. My second mother, the mother who raised me, I was also part of her leaving the planet, and it was tumultuous and chaotic for everybody involved. Everybody. But this one was beautiful and peaceful and calm and full of love. Transitioning without psychedelics, chaos. Transitioning, having done psychedelics, beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to know how you came to do this podcast, and why? Like, I'm sort of getting a sense given your journey, but I don't know where we are on your journey. Are we up to date on your journey? More
Almost.
or less? Almost. Okay.
Almost. So May 2020, my beloved third mother has died. I've had this, I mean, I've seen, now I see like how psychedelics can be so transformative in my life that I'm transforming everybody else's life too. And I'm not saying that like in an arrogant way. Like I hope it's not taken like that. Like I can see the transformative power it's having on lots of people's lives. And I'm committed. I'm like, I need to be doing psychedelics for the rest of my life, but I can't do LSD. Like I can't keep doing that. Like it's such a transition into the infinite for me. And I just decided that my final LSD journey, like that's the last time, that the next time I transition, I'm not coming back. Right. So I can't keep doing LSD. So what do I do? And I was talking to my guide about this. And she mentioned that there's this thing that she has become familiar with, 5-MeO DMT. And I was like, huh, what is that? And, I get some guidance to go off and start thinking about that. So I start researching it. I find Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson
That, yeah.
has done 5-MeO DMT and like is talking like coherently about 5-MeO DMT. So I say, okay, well, I'm hearing some things like it's a very intense experience, but it's short. It's not as long as LSD. So I decide, okay, I'm gonna, that's the one, I'm gonna try that. Because now I'm at a point of evolution. Now I'm at a place where like, I'm not repairing trauma. I'm not reconstructing my life. Like I want to be the next version of me and I want to keep evolving. So I go on a 5-MeO DMT journey. Whoo-wee! And I think
yes, I've done it also. I began after a lifetime of teetotaling. I began there. So
yeah. And that I was so surprised because you're like, I'm like, you started with 5-MeO DMT? Like you can, no warm up, no stretching, no nothing.
It's known as the God drug. Of course I was gonna go there. I also like that it was shorter.
Yes.
Like, again, I could go live in a convent again for a year, or I could try this.
Exactly.
Like, I'm gonna try this.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, I get whipped out into infinity, scoop up some really interesting insight, and get whipped back into this realm. And at this point now, I'm like, this is it. This is the thing. I hope to do this for the rest of my life. If I want to do this for the rest of my life, how will I do this for the rest of my life? How do you make sure you can even do this? I mean, if my therapist and guide got carried off by aliens, I have no idea what I would do. I have no idea how I would keep doing this. How does this become accessible? How do we make this accessible to more people? And then it became, how do we make this accessible to any human being on the planet? And then it became, this is our birthright as humans. It is our birthright as humans to reconnect to ourselves, to reconnect to each other, to reconnect to the divinity, the joy, the light in us. How does every human who wants to do this, how do they have access to do it? And I essentially decided at the beginning of 2021 that I wanted more of my energy and time to be devoted to access to psychedelics. And I don't even remember what I started searching for, but I just started searching online once again, access psychedelics. And I ended up getting connected to people who helped me think about what I could contribute and how I could contribute. And now here I am.
I love that. Thank you. Thanks for doing it. Yeah, because I hope for the same thing. Please, it's like, it's so important. And also I was realizing I was having a fantasy recently of like, I was like, not just people who know they have trauma, not just, all these things, but just like people having this experience. So
Yeah.
big.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Any human who wants it, it
yeah.
would be it. I want it to be my life's work to help humans be more deeply, more joyfully, more creatively human.
Mm,
And I think psychedelics are a tool for that.
yeah. And I also think there's just also something, I heard you say earlier that you're very open to the way people take it. And I think there is something so transforming about this very intentional way that you took it, actually, that you were very intentional. You created a very clear container. It was very clear what you were doing and that you were held in the process. It's big.
Yeah. And major shout out to my therapist and guide who has been very insistent about being well trained. She puts a lot of time and energy into developing herself. She journeys. She has a mentor. So there is a lineage now. It's not just for me, I'm not sort of randomly doing these things. I'm doing these things as part of a structure and a lineage that is purposeful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that you had mentioned was that you wanted to, after encountering me and going back and telling Eric, something has changed and we need to figure out what this is about. You wanted to see if you might get involved with this kind of work. And then you didn't. And I want to hear more about like what happened.
Yeah. I'm so deep in your story. I have to like pull myself back to me. Yes. Yeah, we were so touched. Eric had attended the Boston Trauma Conference, and there were so many beautiful studies on MDMA and psychedelics. And we were very touched by this image of like the male and female therapist on either side of the person having the experience. And we're already a little love bubble, so we were like, hello, we worked together already. It seemed so perfect. But I ran into the issue of it just with maps, at least, and I might be a little behind on my information here because I gave this up a little while ago, but although I have a master's of theology and a master's of transformational leadership, I'm neither a licensed therapist or a minister. And so I ran into that roadblock. And since I already have $100,000 in loans, I was like, I'm going to just reevaluate. And of course, one can do it like without that, but because most of our income comes from my sweetie, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, the danger of losing that, it's just too scary.
Yeah.
And also access, like my access now is like through random gifts. I don't know where these things come from. I don't know. I don't have a source.
Yeah.
So.
And even if like you would have to just trust that whatever you're sharing with someone, isn't gonna damage them.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. No, you'd want to know the source like way back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would have to feel safe about it.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I just did a podcast conversation with Curtis Chappell, who is a blockchain consultant and educator. And blockchain sounds like it doesn't have anything to do with psychedelics, but it has everything to do with what you just said, being able, using technology to trace the source of your psychedelics and verify that they came from where you think they came from and they are what you say they are, or what you believe them to be. It is this sort of trust and safety is essential to widespread access. Essential.
No, it's huge. It's huge.
So it's interesting. So the barriers to access, here, you sort of show up willing, ready, capable, and end up deciding you can't do this work right now because you aren't credentialed in the way that credentialing is required at the moment, and you don't have access to something that is reliable and trustworthy. And so, this is like 2.5 years ago. Think of all the people that you could have served. There's a whole slew of people that they weren't served because you didn't have access, right? And I think that's what this podcast, that's what the work that I'm doing, the research that I'm doing, the conversations that I'm having, that's what this work is about, so that we can rewrite that kind of story, so we can remove these barriers, so that there's no reason why someone who wants to be of service and someone who needs the service, why those people can't connect with each other.
Yeah. And to be clear, like, I'm fully willing to be trained in this process, in this process of using MDMA and psychedelics, but to have to do the extra credential before, I don't want to. This may shift. I don't want to.
Yeah, and there's a difference between being trained and being credentialed.
Yeah.
Right?
So please train me. I'm always getting trained in something.
Yeah.
I'm all about the training.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, may it be so.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say something similar to that. Well, at this point now, with the conversations I'm having and the connections that are being made, and I have this sense, this visualization, which is also something that has definitely accelerated for me with psychedelics. I now think visually much more than I used to. And as we're talking, I'm having this visualization of like a vine or a plant that's growing, and more pieces of the vine are developing, and they're developing faster and faster and faster, and they're connecting with other plants around them. I do have this sense that more connections are being made between people who want to do this work and people who need this work, or people who want to share these experiences and people who want to have these experiences. Like, more of those connections are available now, and they're being made available faster and faster and faster. So I think that, opportunity may arise here, hopefully very soon, for you to be able to also partake of this work.
Yay. And may we all take a lesson from your LSD experience, and may this sort of moving forward be very creative.
Indeed. Amelia, thank you for allowing me to, and holding space, making a container for this story, allowing me to share this story with you. I think, we've been friends a long time. We have many more conversations to have. So maybe we catch up again. Maybe we have another go round here on Keys to the Kingdom, and we see where things are at.
I love that. And thank you for your story, Tammy. Thanks for being willing to share it. Yeah. I loved it.
I love you.
I love you.
Until next time.
Okay.
That wraps up another episode of Keys to the Kingdom. Thanks so much for listening. Check out the show notes for resources we discussed, and follow the Keys conversation on Twitter at psychedelics-key. Until we meet again, remember, you are connected, you are love, and the kingdom is yours.